Hi, welcome to the webinar of Foundation for Philippine Progress. You are tuning in to the launch of our signature event series called Philippines is in the Heart. Good afternoon from Portland. Good afternoon from the Pacific Northwest. We also have people joining from all over the US and other countries such as the Philippines, Australia, and Canada. Good evening to all of you, or good morning to all of you. Thanks for joining us. Maraming salamat po sa inyong pagdalo. We will now get started. The Rondalia music that you heard playing in the background was generously donated to us by Herna Cruz Louis of the American Center of Philippine Arts based in Oakland. Thank you so much for that original music. You may learn more about them at www.philippinearts.org. I know we have about half of our registrants being let in to the attendees room now, but we will go ahead and just start talking about our virtual code of conduct for today. So as I've mentioned, we had about 100 plus people registered to these events, and I don't even recognize majority of the names, and that's pretty incredible. Thank you so much for joining us in the launch of this momentous occasion for us, launching our signature event series. We wish that we can gather in person and get to know one another. However, we recognize that these are unprecedented times and that we're doing the best that we can to stay connected. Because we know that this online platform might be new to some of you, we just want to go over some virtual code of conduct for today. So first, please rename yourself with your name, city, and organization from which you're joining us today. For example, you could write your name, and then I have here Sel from Portland, and my organization is FPP, or Foundation for Philippine Progress. If you click the attendees list, you'll see that there are 3 dots above your name. You may click on that and click rename, and that should allow you to rename yourself. Again, looking at the attendees list, you can see that there are 3 dots above your name. If you click on that and click rename, you should be able to rename yourself. Please mute your phone or computer microphone during the presentations. I think we have really good tech people right now running this presentation, and I think because of that, she might have done the muting automatically already. But you are more than welcome to engage with us throughout this presentation. Please utilize the comments and the Q&A buttons in the bottom of your screens. You may type your comments in the chat room throughout this webinar. If you have any questions, please utilize the Q&A option found in the controls in the bottom of the screen. We have Jeline from our staff who will be running the Q&A portion virtually. And then we also have Roger Rigor from our staff team who will be facilitating or running the chat room for this program. Today's webinar will be recorded and later on will be uploaded to Facebook and YouTube after this event. Hosting today's webinar, we have myself, Rossella De Leon with the Foundation for Philippine Progress, and we also have Ron Antonio, who is the marketing director for the foundation. Let's please welcome Ron.
Thank you, Sel. Rossella De Leon is an educator and a community leader. Born in the Philippines, Rossella moved to the US at a young age. And after leading multiple missions back to communities in the Philippines, Rossella transitioned from a decade of service in higher education and is now seeing her dream to be in lifelong service to the Filipino people come true through the work of the Foundation for Philippine Progress, Incorporated. A fun fact about Sel is that when she was an undergrad at Portland State University and learning about Carlos Bulosan for the first time, she saw a call for contributors to Salem Press, Great Lives from History, an award-winning multi-volume reference series detailing the most important lives through history worldwide. When she saw that Carlos Bulosan was one of the names listed, she applied to be a contributing writer and was commissioned to write about Carlos Bulosan in the Asian Pacific Islander edition of the Great Lives from History series.
Thanks for that introduction, Ron. We could see the cover of this book on the slide right now. Another fun fact, I don't actually have a copy of this book. I looked it up just last week and was surprised to learn that this particular book actually costs $395. And I simply just can't afford that. But I'm more than happy to share the specific piece that I wrote about Carlos Bulosan in this book with you all. And now to introduce my co-host, Ronald Antonio, or Ron, is a semi-retired graphic designer who now spends most of his time working in the Filipino community. He was born and raised in Seattle, Washington, where he grew up picking raspberries with his cousins on Bainbridge Island. He has published poetry in the Seattle Review and the Bricolage. He traveled back to the Philippines in 2013 to assist with typhoon relief and now serves as the volunteer communications director for the Foundation for Philippine Progress. And a fun fact about Ron, before he graduated from UW, 2 years after he discovered Carlos Bulosan, he published a drawing entitled Alos, which was selected as the book cover for the 17th issue of their Literary and Visual Arts Journal at the turn of the millennium. You'll see that book cover on this slide here. So a little about our foundation. The Foundation for Philippine Progress is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that is dedicated to empower and engage communities in programs and projects for the Philippines to secure quality health, education, and basic human rights for every Filipino. We are based here in Portland, Oregon, but we work with communities across the United States while conducting our projects for vulnerable communities in the Philippines. And before I talk about the foundation more, I'd like to show you our promo video.
The Philippines, Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao, Lumad, Aita, workers, students, farmers, mothers, fathers, grandchildren, nurses, teachers, doctors, 7,000 islands without enough water, typhoon prone, vast and rich lands, but the people are hungry. So we've partnered with organizations in the Philippines, nonprofits, hospitals, relief organizations, to launch the Foundation for Philippine Progress. To partner with you for a united, whole, rich Philippines. For a full life for every Filipino.
As Ron shared earlier, I've spent the first decade after college working in higher education. But having survived numerous calamities while growing up in the Philippines, there has always been something pulling my heart to do something about it. The voice of a dear friend and mentor, Freedom Siam, who is one of our poetry readers for today. His voice kept playing in my mind. He used to tell me, if you know that you can lead, it would be a disservice to the people not to do so. So I wanted to see a world where Filipinos had access to basic health, education, and human rights, And so the idea for the Foundation for Philippine Progress was born. During my trips to the Philippines, I found not only the suffering of the people, but also courage. On that same relief mission after Typhoon Haiyan in 2013, I met the most selfless people I've ever known, nuns who trekked the mountains to volunteer at Indigenous people's schools, teachers who give up the comfort of a good salary to volunteer in community schools in far-flung areas, doctors who give up the security of a hospital salary to volunteer in rural areas that need medical support. The people that I met in the Philippines laid the groundwork for the foundation to form partnerships with already thriving community initiatives in the Philippines that ensure that the poor and vulnerable have access to basic health, education, and human rights. So I took my friend Freedom's advice to lead. So in October of 2018, during Filipino American History Month, we launched the Foundation for Philippine Progress. Last year, we celebrated our first year anniversary, and you will see on the screen here the different efforts we've started since our founding a year ago. So we are now in our second year of continuing to further our vision of a full life for every Filipino. And a little bit about this series that you are a part of right now. The 7-part launch of Philippines is in the Heart, our signature event series, is carefully curated as our own contribution in keeping the Philippines alive in our hearts. This was meant to be an in-person event, but due to the restrictions that we have during these times, we are conducting this series virtually. We want to utilize our platform to provide current and accurate bits and pieces about the Philippine history, culture, food, language, along with the current situation on the ground. We want to maximize our platform to get together with all of you to discuss any and everything about the Philippines and be a place where we can have truthful and meaningful discussion about what is dear to us. After all, we know that even though a lot of us are not back home in the motherland, Philippines is in our hearts. Scheduled around key historic moments of the Philippine society, such as the most recent Philippines Independence Day on June 12, or the upcoming Philippine American Friendship Day on July 4th, or the upcoming Philippine State of the Nation address on July 27th. This webinar series is designed to enjoin participants to learn more about truths about the Philippines through the lens of historians, scholars, community organizers, and our volunteer partners for progress in the US and in the Philippines who are doing tireless work on the ground. So we named our series Philippines is in the Heart to honor and commemorate Carlos Bulosan and his work. He was a writer, poet, novelist, and a nationalist who arrived in Seattle in the 1930s. His story and work have made a difference in the lives of so many of us, including mine. And I have my friends and my Filipino student organization, PSU Kaibigan, to thank. Like so many Filipinos, Carlos Bulosan migrated to the US in search of a better life. His experiences and hardships as a new immigrant living in America were documented in his prolific writing and is best known for his novel America is in the Heart. And this was followed by his collection of short stories, The Philippines is in the Heart. So like Carlos Bulosan, we recognize that for a lot of overseas Filipino workers who have been living on the streets of Saudi, Lebanon, Hong Kong, it's all over the news because they lost their jobs due to COVID-19 pandemic. They cry for help in order to continue supporting their families back home. We know that Philippines is in their hearts. For a lot of our kababayans who are grieving the tragic loss of their relatives, who they can't even see because of the travel restrictions in place, we know that Philippines is definitely in their hearts. For the 100,000 Filipino seafarers who are currently stuck at sea and have been longing to go home to their families in the Philippines, we know that the motherland, the Philippines, is also in their hearts. For a lot of our kababayans whose upbringing have been separated from the beauty of the Philippine culture and traditions and are trying to reconnect to their roots through Filipino food and learning Tagalog, we know that Philippines is in their hearts. I fell in love with my people at an early age. I fell in love all over again when we started this foundation that is dedicated to serving the Filipino people. And by our people, I also mean our people who are neglected, disenfranchised, and stigmatized by our society. Philippines is in their hearts too. So, Filipino or not, born in the Philippines or not, the love for the Philippines is something we all share. Our signature event series exists to honor that, and we hope that you enjoy this series that we've put together for you. So before we get started in the main program, I just want to share a little gift that we have for you. Um, so we are, as a gift to all of you, we will be having a raffle towards the end of this webinar. For this first installment of the series, all you need to do is to be here in community with us. One of our staff members will be jotting down your names before the end of the program, during which time we will be picking the winners of these books. So we have The Philippines is in the Heart by Carlos Bulosan, and we have a Tagalog Picture Dictionary because the first event in our series will be a Tagalog appreciation class. And now, to start us off with today's main event, the legacy of Carlos Bulosan through poetry and visual arts, I give the floor to Ron Antonio.
Thank you, Sel. Thank you, Sel. Your selflessness actually continues to really inspire me. So thank you for setting a strong example for all of us. We're actually gonna start with a poem read by someone who embodies Carlos Bulosan's generosity and kindness, who has received grant awards from Artist Trust and the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture. His work has been published in the Bellingham Review, Blood Orange Review, and Moss, a journal of the Pacific Northwest. He has also earned fellowships from Kundiman and the Jack Straw Cultural Center, both Filipino and Japanese ancestry, currently residing in Seattle, Washington. We will now play a video reading of this three-time Grand Slam poetry champion, Troy Osaki.
To My Countrymen by Carlos Bulosan. With the stroke of my hand, I cut the tides that swept the destinies of men. Now, in this field of combat, where my armies challenged the tragic course of history, look, listen, cries crescenting blood, crimsoning our island, because I came. Here, I slapped the earth to make you a home, confounding fates, even the farthest star, where light resolved itself into your faith, because I came to stake a claim on the world. And across the flaming darkness of life, I flung a sword of defiance to give you freedom. Here, in the seven-pillared wisdom house of truth, where I knelt, where I wept, where I lived, to change the course of history, because I love you.
So Carlos Bulosan was born on November 2nd, 1911, in the province of Pangasinan, Philippines. His mother, Marta Sampayan, sold salted fish in the public market. His dad, Simeon Bulosan, was a peasant farmer. He grew up in the countryside, living on a hectare of land with a grass hut, owned by his father, in the village of Mangusmana, located in the town of Binalonan. Economically, life was hard. He had only completed 3 years of schooling and spoke little English before he was able to save up $75 to sail off to America. He arrived in the United States on July 22nd, 1930, and landed in the port of Seattle in Washington near Pier 91. Upon arrival, he learned from one of his countrymen that for Filipinos, all roads go to California and all travelers end up in Los Angeles. He traveled to meet his older brothers in Lompoc, California, just north of Santa Barbara. He worked as a dishwasher in the famous Madonna Inn in San Luis Obispo. He followed the seasons, hitchhiking on trains, up and down the West Coast looking for work, harvesting asparagus in Stockton, apples in Yakima, or venturing out to the Alaskan Canaries. It was in Los Angeles where he would meet union leader Chris Salvas, where they both helped organize independent unions as a response to wage cuts, unemployment, discrimination, and atrocious working conditions caused by the Great Depression. When he could not find work, he spent countless hours in the Los Angeles Public Library, reading a book a day. Most of his reading and writing took place within the 10 years leading up to 1946. In 1936, he became ill with tuberculosis and received treatment for a lesion in his right lung. In 1937, his kneecap was removed to treat the cancer in his leg, which is why he walked with a pronounced limp. On June 7, 1938, his doctor said to him, "You have no more ribs in your right side, young man, but you will live for a while. Mabuhay." He was released from the Los Angeles County Hospital, but his body was frail and vulnerable, and his ill health would plague him for the remaining 18 years of his life. Carlos Bulosan was a voracious reader. It was on his hospital bed where his ideas began to coalesce in qualitatively new ways. He writes, "I stayed in this hospital for 2 years, but it took me another 5 years before I was able to put my grand dream on paper in a literate form. When it began, my relentless creative activity began, and many things followed from my typewriter for 2 relentless years. Poetry, short stories, articles on political and cultural subjects, and books. The Laughter of My Father, written in 12 days. The Voice of Bataan, 3 days. America's in the Heart, 24 days. Course for America, Letter from America, and 2 books for children, as well as The Dark People." In 1940, he published his poem, "If You Want to Know What We Are." In 1942, he was published as one of 6 featured Filipino poets in the book Chorus for America. In 1943, he published his first book of poetry, The Voice of Bataan. In 1944, he published The Laughter of My Father. And in 1946, he published America's in the Heart, which reflected the collective life experiences of thousands of Filipino immigrants who were attracted to this country. In 1952, Carlos Bulosan was invited by Chris Salvas to edit the yearbook for the International Longshoremen and Warehouse Union, ILWU Local 37, which was predominantly a Filipino-American cannery trade union based in Seattle. In 1956, he became malnourished and developed an advanced stage of bronchopneumonia, which eventually took his life on September 11. In his obituary, his good friend Chris Salvas wrote, "Carlos was famous for his jungle salad served during committee meetings. Estate, one typewriter, a 12-year-old suit, a 20-year-old suit, unfinished manuscripts, and a worn-out sock. His finances, zero. Beneficiary, his people. Carlos Bulosan never returned to the Philippines and never became a US citizen. For 2 decades after his death, his work was largely forgotten until a group of Asian Americans rediscovered his works, which led to the republication of America's in the Heart in 1973. And here we are in the year 2020, unlocking the memories of the shy 5'1" Filipino writer who was handsome, generous, and loved to drink on occasion. Now let me take the time to introduce our next reader, an activist out of Seattle, Washington, who continues to spend her time organizing youth and students, Jordan Farallon.
Biography by Carlos Bulosan. There is no end of sadness. When winter came and sprawled over the trees and houses, a man rose from his sleep and kissed his wife, who wept. A child was born. Delicately, the film of his life unfolded like a coral sea, where stone is a hard substance of wind and water leaking into memory like pain. He was a young man. He looked at himself through a glass that was too real to image, his face unreal before his eyes. These were vivid to the hands. These were too real to the hearts that bled to sustain life. He was a man, and the sun that leaped into his eyes, the grass beneath his feet that walked cobbled streets, the cities, all were a challenge to his imagination. But his mother, decaying in a nameless grave, his father watching a changing world through iron bars, his broken childhood were as real as pain locking memory.
So Carlos Bulosan's biography remains elusive. In his autobiography that was published by 20th century authors, he was born on November 24th, 1914, the year that is consistent with what is carved on his headstone in Mount Pleasant Cemetery, Seattle. Carrie McWilliams, a friend who wrote the introduction to America's in the Heart in its 1973 republication, also writes that he was born on November 24th, but in the year 1913, not 1914. According to the FBI field office in Seattle, he was born on November 12, 1912, which is also inconsistent with what the FBI card on Carlos Bulosan states. That clearly shows 11/4/12. But the earliest documentation, his baptismal records, state that he was born on November 2nd, 1911, the date that I used to start off this presentation, just because it's the same birthday as my dad's. Just like his stories, it is unclear what was real and what was fiction. And maybe he designed it to be, as he says in his own words, impossible to determine which is fact and which is the flight of the imagination. What stories did he experience firsthand? And what stories did he collect from the people he would befriend? Did he really witness the bullying and the beatings? Did he really find his friend Leroy hanging from a eucalyptus tree with his entrails spilled open and his eye popped out of its socket? The same Leroy who would introduce him and talk to him about unions and unity? Did he really wake to the body of his friend Crispin, who died of starvation and cold, in which he would write, men like Crispin, who had poetry in their souls, come silently into this world and live quietly down the years. And yet when they are gone, no moon in the sky is lucid enough to compare with the light they shed when they are among the living. One thing is for sure, Carlos Bulosan was able to draw inspiration from his pain, the collective experiences of immigrants and workers, the horrible truths of his generation, to bring us stories that are heartbreaking and real, stories that are his as well as theirs. Our next reader is a former artistic director of Bindlestiff Studio, the only permanent theater art space in the country devoted to showcasing work in Filipinx, emerging and veteran performing artists. She is the owner and operator of Velasco Arts, a cultural arts production company in Seattle. This summer, you can find her half-acre farm in the Sammamish Valley, where she is growing paria, kamatis, and calabasa. We now bring you Lorna Velasco.
Excerpt from Carlos Bulosan's How My Stories Were Written. Every man dies, but no man comes home again. He said sadly, no man comes to bathe in the cool water of the river, to watch the golden grain in the fields, to know the grandeur of the meadowlark on the wing. No man comes back to feel the green loam of the land with his bare feet, to touch the rich soil with his loving hands, to see the earth move under him as he walks under his silent skies. I will come back, Apulakay, I said. He looked at me silently and long. Then there were tiny tears in his eyes. Son, he said at last, touching my head with his faded hands, I will go home now. He reached for his cane and walked away. He did not come again. Many years passed and everybody thought he was dead. And in that year of my grand awakening, I decided to look for the old man. I went to the mountains and looked for him, sleeping in several forests and crossing many ravines and hills, shouting in the wind and climbing the tallest trees to see some sign of human habitation on the caves that dotted the mountainside. And at last I found him sitting by a small stream. Good morning, Apulakay, I greeted him. He stirred, but his face was lifted towards the sun. I came to say goodbye, I told him. So, it is you, he said. I thought you left long ago. Now is the time, Apulakay, I said. But tell me this, is it not dangerous to live all by yourself in the mountains? What is there to fear in the night? The beast, the birds, the trees, the storms and tempests? Would you be afraid of them? There is nothing to fear in the night, in the heart of night. But in the daylight among men, there is the greatest fear. But why, Apulakay? In the savage heart of man, there dwells the greatest fear among the living. But man has a mind. That is the seed of all fear, the mind of man. The beast in the jungle with his ferocious fangs and is less dangerous than man with his cultivated mind. It is the heart that counts. The heart is everything, son. Is that why you tell the kind of stories you have told us? To make us laugh? Laughter is the beginning of wisdom. There is perhaps a great truth in what you've just said. That is why I came to see you. I will leave our country soon and I would like to remember all your stories. But why? In that land where you are going, will the people give you something to eat when you retell them? Will you not be afraid the children will stone you? I don't know, Apulakay, but this I know. If the retelling of your stories will give me a little wisdom of the heart, then I shall have come home again. And now in America, writing many years later, I do not exactly know which were the words of the old man of the mountains and which are mine, but they are his tales as well as mine, so I hope we have written stories that really belong to everyone in that valley, beautiful beyond any telling of it. So Carlos Bulosan never came back home to the Philippines. He was part of that Manong generation of over 125,000 men cultivating the fields and working at the canneries. Many remain as bachelors living in single residential housing units in Sato Market in San Francisco or the International District here in Seattle. In his first line, "Every man dies, but no one comes home," is haunting and echoed his fate of many men like him, a knowing and a longing that he will never see the fields and the rivers of his provincia again. "I came to say goodbye," he tells the old man. The old man follows with questions. "Why leave? Will you be fed, taken care of?" Was followed by caution for him to be careful of the cultivated mind of man, and that is not quite trustworthy as the heart of man. And the old man asked for him to keep his heart intact. And the way to keep his heart intact and his home alive is to remember the stories of his people. In his last line, "This I know, the retelling of your stories will give me a little wisdom of the heart, then I shall have come home again." So Carlos Bulosan taught himself how to read and write and left us a unique gift with his autobiographical work. He crystallized the world of a farm worker in the Great Depression. And in chapter 7 of America's in the Heart, there is a clearly written response in which he wrote, "I will become a writer and make you all live again in my words." He was the contemporary of John Steinbeck, but while we got to study Grapes of Wrath or Of Mice and Men in high school, Carlos Bulosan, who is the real deal, was left in the shadows. I didn't know about Bulosan until I was a freshman in college when I saw a play by Teatro ng Tanan, Theater for Everyone in San Francisco, directed by Chris Miliado. The play was an adaptation from his book, America's in the Heart. And for the first time, I saw Filipinos on stage telling my stories. His work resonates to this day as he documented the discrimination, racism, exploitation, and wholesale dehumanizations of Filipinos by the same colonial powers we continue to be subjected to this day. He was also compelled to realize that for his own self-determination and liberation, that we as the working class will need to organize. Thank you, FPP, for letting me be a part of this panel.
Thank you, Lorna. Thank you for that beautiful reading. So as Lorna says, Carlos Bulosan never made it back to the Philippines, but it's amazing how he's still able to return and take us there through his words, as if he took his solitude and his hurt, compressed it and used it to propel all of us back to that valley beautiful beyond any telling of it. A sharp contrast to a letter he writes on May 2nd of 1938. He writes, "Do you know what a Filipino feels in America? I mean, one who is aware of the intricate forces of chaos. He is the loneliest thing on earth. There is much to be appreciated about him: beauty, wealth, power, grandeur. But is he a part of these luxuries? He looks, poor man, through the fingers of his eyes. He is enchained, damnably, to his race, his heritage. He is betrayed, my friend." This sentiment of betrayal stems from the Thomasite-style education that took place in the early 1900s, which was ingrained in Carlos Bulosan's generation, that Filipinos were equal to the Americans, which he later realizes was a lie. He would later write, "I know deep down in my heart that I am in exile in America. I feel like a criminal running away from a crime I did not commit. And this crime is that I am a Filipino in America." Our next reader is a union organizer out of Portland, Oregon. She also engages in the women's struggle internationally. Please give your undivided attention to Angelica Lim.
Letter in Exile. Hourly, the planes scour the skies to chart the uncharted defenses of their loved country. It is summer, and the waiting steamers will unload by the Sound Sea to fill the needs of cities falling in the hunger of working men, while the green hills widen their luxuriant shoulders of sharp glades caught in the palm of the determinate sun, born of the islands. All seems to concentrate on their way. They make millions, and their sons enter nightclubs. Bright virgin girls moan and bleed in their beds. They close banks, and their daughters throw money to titled foreign gentlemen and cynical waiters. Their bourgeois homes are wrecked. Into the streets they pursue the course of their passion. They hold life in bubbles of drunkenness and fancy. Knowing the tremendous web of this mistake, I think of our favorite little islands cupped in those dove-like moving seas, and our paternal homestead where exuberant brothers and silent sisters met every morning to exhibit all ways of courtesy. We were passionate in those days. Our parents condoned no dishonesties and personal indecencies. Recalling all this before the hour of midnight, I remembered you, brother, and hoped you could watch with me the splendid glide of limousines in the streets, and in that other, the long parade of hungry working men that approached my window at dawn to remind me once again of the coughing orbit of life in this strange land, their loved country. We didn't have the poet's vision of the hangman's dream to twist the whole of living on our finger, but in those islands, under familiar trees, we spoke of the littlest things with the simplest joys. There were no books and hard intellectual thoughts, but we grew into manhood with the music of trees in our hearts that would not break, breaking at last to the bareness of hard city streets. All of it was anxiety, all the years that passed, and I'm still facing a greater anxiety, the promised happiness that never came to me. 10 years for me and 12 for you, and the other younger brother who could not find himself, 15 years, and he was only a child when he came. But we are still here burning with 1,000 fevers, though now more discerning the enemy close at hand. I was God's wonder boy. But if I did not defile the greed of madmen, if I did not save beauty from the naked blasphemies of money, you must know that I cried when the Jews were driven from their country, when the Negroes were burned in their homes. You must know that with these feeble hands, I crept to the window, unashamed to die in a world gone mad with power. Power and greed will ravage beauty and give us loneliness, but all this will come to pass. So live the new year flooding the cities with noises like the tragic noises of the revolution that reach me like a heart stroke, and will move forward on the indiscriminate course of history that never stops to rectify our tragic misgivings and shame. I wrote some really quick reflections on my relationship to Carlos Bulosan, and I was quickly reminded, as it's been a couple years that I've actually read my favorite books from him, which are both America's in the Heart and also Cry and Dedication, that Carlos Bulosan actually bridged the gap of my understanding, an understanding of what it means to be a Filipino actually in America, grappling with our country and our motherland's commitments to sacrifice, and beauty and struggle, and really a deep, genuine desire for peace for Filipino people all over the world. When I think about Carlos Bulosan's writing, I think about how it deeply impacts me and continues to impact me in my work with workers, as a union organizer, as an organizer committed to women being free, Filipino women being free. And this, just something like Sel was saying, the genuine love that he has and continues to show in his writing for the Filipino people, for the motherland, and that he never forgot the Philippines to his dying breath. So I thank Carlos Bulosan. I thank the foundation for having me. And this is such an honor to be here.
Thank you, Angelica. And thank you for upholding his legacy through your day-to-day organizing. Just to highlight some of the lines from the poem, knowing the tremendous web of this mistake, we are still burning with 1,000 fevers, like the tragic noises of revolution that reach me like a heart stroke, and all will move forward on the indiscriminate course of history that never stops to rectify our tragic misgivings and shame. The blueprint for this piece can be identified in Carlos Bulosan's letter to a Filipino woman, where Carlos Bulosan writes, "We in America understand the many imperfections of democracy and the malignant disease which has been corroding its very heart. Now America is in mortal danger within and without, from selfishness and greed, from the terror of the powerful who want more power, and from the unenlightened who fear new ideas. We who are free will supply the human inspiration to resist aggression to the end. I know that out of this struggle will come a new race of men, and history will flow forward again." And without further delay, let's give our attention to another poet, engineer, and community organizer in Portland, Oregon, He co-founded White Noise Project, a reading and discussion series centering BIPOC artists and writers, now in its 4th year. Please focus your attention on Mr. Jake Vermas.
Hi, thank you, Ron and Rossella. It's an honor to be here with everyone. And I'd like to dedicate my reading to Some Domingo and Jean Viernes, who on June 1st, the Seattle community lost, and who, like all of us here, stood on the shoulders of giants like Bulosan and others and followed in their footsteps in fighting for liberation. The Foreigners, by Carlos Bulosan. You cannot blame us. We followed the sun and the rain with gladness and hope. There are many lands to go to, but we are astounded by your horizons, and we are glad we came with our children. We came to share in the machinery of your greatness. We are unhappy to discover this. Your people are miserable from the lack of mutual speech, and their children are stereotyped. We cannot be like them. We brought our country's speech with us. I'm afraid I cannot write our language, but I can work and walk in the streets, peopled with men who know no compromise, till I stumble against you in the dark, and I can rap at you and scratch you like a cat, and I can make you feel the strength of our city. We can jump over the tall buildings like leaves, but without words to deceive us, and fall upon your feet, but without tears to deceive us, we are invincible with death. Look and examine us. It's hard to talk about the impact that Carlos Bulosan's had on my life because I feel like it started since, before I was born. My dad was a student at UW in the early 70s, and Red America was in the heart in an ethnic studies class. And because of the sacrifices, of like other generations to bring that and make it a priority, and have the University of Washington Press even published the new edition of America's in the Heart. You probably never would have transferred to UP Diliman and met my mom, and so reading it when I was a kid, and again I'm struck with how now it's only one of many Filipino perspectives, but I had never really seen myself in art before that, and kind of forced to read things like John Steinbeck and Shakespeare and all this other crap. But kind of as an ancestor, I've tried to carry a lot of his work with me in my organizing for White Noise Project and to center writers of color. And it's funny how Poetry Magazine is in the news lately for publishing a bunch of racist BS. But in the beginning of the magazine, the founding editor, Harry Monroe, really went out of her way to publish Filipino poets like Carlos Bulosan and Jose Garcia Villa, and so it's nice to know that we're out there. And like Lorna, I really resonate with the line, yes, I will be a writer and make you all live on in my words. So just when I was in college, there was this, I went to a more conservative school, and the whole thing was about art that's not political, and knowing that, art has always been political, and writers like Bulosan and others kind of make space for us today. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jake. And thank you for also giving attention to Jean Viernes and Some Domingo, two union organizers, two giants in our history that we should always remember. You cannot blame us. We followed the sun and the rain with gladness and hope. We can jump over the tall buildings like leaves. We are invincible with death. Look and examine us. The Foreigners is a poem that collectively expresses his relationship with writing in a foreign language. Earlier he writes, "Then it came to me like a revelation that I could actually write understandable English. I was seized with happiness. When the long letter was finished, a letter which was actually a story of my life, I jumped to my feet and shouted through my tears, 'They can't silence me anymore. I'll tell the world what they have done to me.'" Anti-Filipino sentiments to, quote, "kick Filipinos out" began in Yakima, Washington in 1928 and quickly spread to Exeter, California by 1929. Racism that excluded Filipinos from work was in full swing from 1930 to 1934. In response to this, organizing efforts, spearheaded by the cannery workers in Seattle, Washington, and the packing house workers in Salinas, California, culminated in the formation of an international union, UKAPAWA, or the United Cannery and Packing House Workers of America, in which Carlos Bulosan's good friend, Chris Mensalvas, served as president from 1949 to 1959. The present-day ILWU Local 37, based in Seattle, is the outcome of these efforts. Next, we have an educator activist who now resides in the Bay Area, but is still a loyal Seattle Mariners fan. Please give your attention to Principal Freedom Alasham, who will be reading Carlos Bulosan's A Song for Chris Mensalvas.
Thank you, Ron. Shout out to the foundation for the opportunity. Folks from the south end of Seattle, Rainier Valley, Beacon Hill, and my new home, Daly City, and the Excelsior District of San Francisco. Song for Chris Mensalvas' birthday. How many years did we fight the beast together? You in your violent way, in your troublous world, I in my quiet way, with songs of love. Over the years, we fought apart and together, scarring our lives, breaking our hearts, for the shining heart of a heartless world, for the nameless multitude in our beautiful land, for the worker and the unemployed, for the colored and the foreign-born. And we won. We will win, because we, for truth, for beauty, for life, we fight for the splendor of love. They are afraid, my brother. They are afraid of our mighty fists, my brother. They are afraid of the magnificence of our works, my brother. They are even afraid of our songs of love, my brother. So on this day of your birthday, I'm happy that the glissando of time has compacted at last our early promises in that faraway city of our youth that I alone can totally remember, that I alone can destroy with stroke of my hand. So joy to your world and all that lives in it. Joy to your coming years. Joy to your unrelenting heart and mind. Joy to your brown hands that suffered so much, more than mine did, having suffered another terror, the terror of the mirroring soul. Joy to your wife. Joy to your children. Joy to your friends. Joy, joy, joy. Joy to all the world. And for all this joy, let me have one little joy to guide my mind that remembers her always. The quiet little one that moved my heart to remember, always to remember the song of love. They are afraid, my brother. They are afraid of our mighty fists, my brother. They are afraid of the magnificence of our works, my brother. They are even afraid of our songs of love, my brother. Again, thanks to the foundation and everybody, and Ron and everybody who put this opportunity together. Songs of love, for whom and for what, or what purpose, or whose benefit? These are the questions that I ask. And I think they're rhetorical as we continue to study deeply and collectively the works of folks like Carlos Bulosan. Like many of my heroes before me, whether that's, and thank you for the shout out earlier to Jean Viernes and Salmi Domingo, but also Chris Monsalves and Carlos Bulosan, they were identified as enemies of the state. And we paid homage to them by establishing the first overseas chapter of Anak Bayan in Seattle back in 2002 at the Eastern Hotel where this photo is that's posted right now, to pay homage to Bulosan, Monsalves, Domingo, and Viernes, and their work in the Filipino community in the diaspora here in the United States and all over the world. We started here because it was an expression of love. It's not anti anything, but it's more pro people, pro democracy, and it's about taking care of one another in the most simplest, truest, and sincerest form. Peace.
Cool. Thank you for your insight. You're a big reason why I do this work also. And thanks for getting me hip to the cry and the dedication early in my life. The song for Chris Monsalves combines both Carlos Bulosan and Chris Monsalves' personalities and characteristics. Chris Monsalves was known to be a fierce fighter and staunch organizer. You are afraid of our mighty fists, my brother. And Bulosan himself was known to be a frail, gentle, and more of a person who sparred with words. They are even afraid of our songs of love, my brother. This piece captures their combined magnificence, which took material form in the formation of the ILWU Local 37. It also hints to the developing social consciousness of Carlos Bulosan and how he is able to distill the hope of organizing from his bitter experiences of racism and segregation. In a letter written on July 22nd, 1942, Carlos Bulosan writes, "In spite of everything that has happened to me in America, I am not sorry that I was born a Filipino. When I say Filipino, the sound cuts deep into my being. It hurts. It will take years to wipe out the sharpness of the word, to erase its notorious connotation in America. And only a great faith in some common goal can give it fullness again. For this next reading, I would like for you all to close your eyes and imagine what is happening today. What happened in the last 4 months? COVID-19, the BLM movement, even the Disneyland workers who are on the picket lines right now as the economy struggles to reopen. Who are at the front lines risking their health, working the hardest? Who are the ones being killed? Who are the ones that are being bullied? I want you to close your eyes. There will be nothing to see on the screen. And I want you to keep in mind that this next piece was written more than 74 years ago.
It has fallen upon us to inspire a united front among our people, he said. We must win the backward elements over to our camp, but we must also destroy that which is corrupt among ourselves. These are the fundamentals of our time, but these are also the realities that we must grasp in full. We must achieve articulation of social ideas, not only for some kind of economic security, but also to help culture bloom as it should in our time. We are approaching what will be the greatest achievement of our generation, the discovery of a new vista of literature, that is, to speak to the people and to be understood by them. We must look for the mainspring of democracy, but we must also destroy false ideals. We must discover the origin of our freedom and write of it in broad national terms. We must interpret history in terms of liberty. We must advocate democratic ideas and fight all forces that would abort our culture. This is the greatest responsibility of literature, to find in our struggle that which has a future. Literature is a living and growing thing. We must destroy that which is dying because it does not die by itself. We in America understand the many imperfections of democracy and the malignant disease corroding its very heart. We must be united in the effort to make an America in which our people can find happiness. It is a great wrong that anyone in America, whether he be brown or white, should be illiterate or hungry or miserable. We must live in America where there is freedom for all, regardless of color, station, and beliefs. Great Americans work with unselfish devotion toward one goal, that is, to use the power of the myriad peoples in the service of America's freedom. They made it their guiding principle. In this, we are the same. We must also fight for an America where a man should be given unconditional opportunities to cultivate his potentialities and to restore him to his rightful dignity. It is but fair to say that America is not a land of one race or one class of men. We are all Americans that have toiled and suffered and known oppression and defeat, from the first Indian that offered peace in Manhattan to the last Filipino pea pickers. America is not bound by geographical latitudes. America is not merely a land or an institution. America is in the hearts of men that died for freedom. It is also in the eyes of men that are building a new world. America is a prophecy of a new society of men, of a system that knows no sorrow or strife or suffering. America is a warning to those who would try to falsify the ideals of free men. America is also the nameless foreigner, the homeless refugee, the hungry boy begging for a job and the black body dangling on a tree. America is the illiterate immigrant who is ashamed that the world of books and intellectual opportunities is closed to him. We are all that nameless foreigner, that homeless refugee, that hungry boy, that illiterate immigrant, and that lynched black body. All of us, from the first Adams to the last Filipino, native born or alien, educated or illiterate, we are America. The old world is dying, but a new world is being born. It generates inspiration from the chaos that beats upon us all, the false grandeur and security, the unfulfilled promises and illusory power. The number of the dead and those about to die will charge the forces of our courage and determination. The old world will die so that the new world will be born with less sacrifice and agony on the living.
So this voice recording was by Art of Verse, who was born in the Philippines, raised in Alaska, organized in Seattle, and is now a cultural worker in Los Angeles, California. The excerpt that he read was from Carlos Bulosan's America's in the Heart. Our next readers are Patrick and Christian and AK. All three are alumni of PSU Kaibigan, the Filipino American Student Association at Portland State University. They all learned about Carlos Bulosan through the student organization's America's in the Heart book club, an annual trip to visit Bulosan's gravesite in Seattle. Today, they continue to organize within the Portland API community. Please give your attention as they recite Carlos Bulosan's If You Want to Know What We Are.
If you want to know what we are.
By Carlos
Bulosan. If you want to know what we are, we inhabit forest, mountain, river shore, who harness beasts, living still, martial music, the classist language of the heart, who celebrate labor, wisdom of the mind, peace of the blood, na nagdiriwang ng paggawa,
ng karunungan ng isip, na kapayapaan ng dugo.
If you want to know what we are, who become animate at the rain's metallic ring, the stones accumulated strength, who tremble in the wind's blossoming that enervates earth's potentialities, who stir just as flowers unfold to the sun.
If you want to know what we are, who grow powerful and deathless in countless counterparts, each part pregnant with hope, each hope supreme, each supremacy classless, each classlessness nourished by unlimited splendor of comradeship.
We are multitudes the world over, millions everywhere in violent factories, sordid tenements, crowded cities, in skies
and seas
and rivers,
in lands everywhere.
Our numbers increase as the wide world revolves and increases arrogance,
hunger,
disease, and death.
We are the men and women reading books,
We are the men and women reading books,
searching in the pages of history for the lost word, the key to the mystery of living peace, imperishable joy. We are factory hands,
field hands,
mill hand,
everywhere,
molding,
creating,
building structures,
forging ahead.
ahead, reaching for the future.
Nourish in the heart.
We are
Doctors,
scientists,
chemists,
discovering, eliminating disease and hunger
hunger,
and antagonisms.
antagonisms.
We are soldiers, Navymen, citizens, guarding the imperishable will of man to live in grandeur.
We are the living dream of dead men everywhere,
We are the living dream of dead men everywhere.
the unquenchable truth the class memories create to stagger the infamous world with prophecies of unlimited happiness, a deathless humanity. We are the
living and the
dead
dead
men
men everywhere.
Kung nais mong makilala kung ano kami, tunghayan. If you want to know what we are, observe.
Observe.
The bloody club smashing heads, the bayonet penetrating hollowed breasts giving no mercy.
Giving no mercy.
Watch the bullet crashing upon armless citizens.
Citizens.
Look at the tear gas choking the weakened lung.
If you want to know what we are, see the lynch trees blossoming, the hysterical mob rioting. Remember the prisoner beaten by detectives to confess a crime he did not commit.
A crime he did not commit. A crime he did not commit.
He was honest and who stood alone before the rapid jury of 10 men.
And who was sentenced to hang by a judge whose bourgeoisie arrogance betrayed the office he claimed his own. Name the marked man, the violator of secrets. Observe the banker.
The banker.
The gangster.
The gangster.
The mobsters.
The mobsters.
Who kill
and go free.
Kami ang mga kaawa-awang nagdurusa para sa likas na pagmamahal.
We are the sufferers who suffer for natural love, for man, who commemorate the humanities of every man.
To commemorate the humanities of every man.
We are the toilers who toil to make the starved earth a place of abundance, who transform abundance into deathless fragrance.
We are the desires of anonymous men everywhere.
We are the desires of anonymous men everywhere.
To impregnate the wide earth's lustrous wealth with a gleaming fluorescence, we are the new thoughts.
New thoughts.
The new foundation.
New foundations.
The new verdure of the mind, we are the new hope, new joy, life everywhere.
Kami ang bagong pag-asa, bagong ligaya, buhay sa lahat ng dako.
Kami ang bagong pag-asa, bagong ligaya, buhay sa lahat ng dako.
We are the vision and the star.
The quietest of pain.
We are the terminals of inquisitions.
The hiatuses of a new crusade.
We are the subterranean subways of sufferings.
We are the will of dignities.
We are the living testament of a flowering race.
If you want to know what we are,
kung nais
mong makilala kung ano kami.
If you want to know what we are,
kami ay.
We are.
We are
revolution.
So Carlos Bulosan's compelling and moving words is, it's very relevant and poignant still today, as we grieve the racial injustices, the state violence and oppressions that continues to happen all around us. I just remember during our undergrad years with Rossella, with Christian, with AK, and so many other members of Kaibigan, the Philippine American Student Association of Portland State University, we would read, his popular memoir, America is in the Heart. And annually, as part of our Carlos Bulosan book club, I could remember how we would unpack his book chapter by chapter, and just Bulosan's way with words captured through his true account of the stories of the diaspora and the Filipino American experience of our ancestors. And the highlight of our book, and Christian and AK and Rossella would remember this, is that after we read the book, we would be visiting the Carlos Bulosan Memorial exhibit at the Eastern Hotel in Seattle International District, and paying respect to his final resting place at the Mount Pleasant Cemetery in Seattle. And it was just so moving to just see everyone that was part of this book, this annual book club, to read our most favorite passages in front of him in his final resting place.
Well, thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Christian and AK, for that beautiful rendition of the piece. Sel actually showed me a YouTube video of the live performance, and I mean, it's already chilling just hearing it through Zoom, but live, it amplifies it even more. So thank you again. The old world will die so that the new world will be born. I knew even then that it was not natural for a man to hate himself or to be afraid of himself. It was not natural, indeed, to run from goodness and beauty, which I had done so many times. It was not natural for him to be cruel and without compassion. Carlos Bulosan. Before we get to our last reading, I would like to share the impressions that Carlos Bulosan had on 4 of his closest friends. Hypersensitive, wildly imaginative, gentle. He had the bright eyes, ready smile, and innocent laughter of a precocious child. Incidentally, those Caucasian women were always interested in him, as he undoubtedly was in them. Most of them were large enough to have held him in their laps with ease, but they adored him as much as they adored them. Carrie McWilliams, friend and author. An astounding child man of acute artistic sensibilities, thrust full-blown into a world of the cruelly insensitive. Dolores S. Feria, professor. We had many laughters together, and when he had a little to drink, his poetical self babbles. Stanley P. Garibay, editor and someone who knew him well. A tiny person with a limp, with an exquisite face, almost facially beautiful, with gleaming teeth and lovely brown eyes, shy, generous, terribly poor, terribly exiled in California, adoring Caucasian women, sartorially exquisite, always laughing through a face that masked tragedy, a Filipino patriot, a touch of the melodramatic about him, given to telling wildly improbable stories about himself, disappearing from Southern California for months at a time, probably to work in Seattle or an Alaskan cannery, showing up finally at my home with some touching gift, a book of poems, a box of Filipino candy. If I were a good Christian, I think I might label him a saint, for he radiated kindness and gentleness. John Fante, novelist, screenwriter, and good friend. Our last reading for today is a recording from a Bay Area MC, organizer, artist activist, who goes by Nomi of Power Struggle.
Waking in the 20th Century, a poem by Carlos Bulosan. The night shifts with the summer blue of the ocean and the horizons turn like a lifted cup. There are stars in the sky. My feet are on the ground. I walk in the warm wind and my heart is beating like the waves upon the shore where the motorists are making noises and configuration of light. The night is like a trembling heart, beating louder and louder to the distant murmur of planes and artilleries. I waited in the night, and now it is near dawn. The image of a new world lifts its shorelines under faded stars, deep in the drinking blue. I am caught by a spasm of sadness and fear, As the day breaks, the flood of the world's miseries congeals me. I see my father as he was in those years, huddled behind the wooden plow, the rainstorm rearing about him. A little man hoping for the quiet of sun and abundance. A transport plane takes off, and now it is a leaf in the cloudless sky. Once more I'm jerked to the present and found the death of myself. I am chilled by the death of unborn children, the bonfires of history, the lost unwritten songs. I see the unfinished experiments destroyed and the whole of life staring in blood. The day is like a trembling heart. Alone in the harbor, I feel the world burst in the wide canyons of my thoughts. I am glad I have seen everything, for there will be days when we will stand together, fighting for our right to stand together. I think they will understand why we should stand together in our time.
A crowd of Filipino cannery workers and other friends sat in respectful silence as the casket of Carlos Bulosan was wheeled from the Cannery Workers Union Hall at 221 Main Street yesterday afternoon. A handful of Skid Road hangers-on drifted by to watch and ask, "What's going on?" "It's a funeral," a pallbearer said curtly. "The funeral of a great man," said an elderly Filipino American standing by. Mr. Bulosan, small, fragile, crusading Filipino author of many novels, poems, and short stories, was being given his last rites in the Union Hall that was the subject of many of his recent writings. He died Tuesday at the age of 41. Fellow union members and friends filed past the burr as Mr. Bulosan's body lay in state. The Reverend Dr. John W. Collin, retired Methodist minister and father of John Collin, a Seattle attorney, preached the funeral eulogy. Chris Monsalvas, president of Cannery Workers Local Number 37, International Longshoremen and Warehousemen Union, recalled his longtime friendship with Mr. Bulosan and told of their depression hardships. "It was the death of the depression, and we Filipinos were recruited for cheap farm labor," Monsalvas said. "We picked apples in Yakima and worked in the fields near Salinas, California. But all the time, Carlos was reading in his continuous search for knowledge." Later, during the Second World War, when he was called to Washington, D.C. with the Office of War Information, he was chosen by President Roosevelt's advisory board to draft one of the late president's 4 freedoms, freedom from want. One of Mr. Bulosan's America's in the Heart became a bestseller in 1946. When Mr. Bulosan came to the United States in 1931, he had only $2.50, couldn't read, and couldn't speak with his fellow Filipino Americans because he did not know the Tagalog dialect they spoke. He learned to read from children's books in the Los Angeles Public Library. Mr. Bulosan was working on a Carnegie Institute fellowship when he died. His almost completed manuscript, a sequel to America is in the Heart, will be submitted to an Easter publisher, said his brother, Aurelio Bulosan, who came from Paso Robles, California for the funeral. Mr. Bulosan was buried in Mount Pleasant. The Seattle Times, Sunday, September 16, 1956. And I'm going to close with a quote, another quote from Carlos Bulosan. "The making of a genuine artist or writer is not mysterious. It is not the work of divine providence. Social conditions, history, and the people's struggles are the factors behind it. My making as a writer and poet is not mysterious. Neither was I gifted by an unknown power. It was hardworking and hard living, suffering, loneliness, pain, hunger, hate, joy, happiness, pity, compassion. All these factors made me a writer. Plus, of course, my tenderness, my affection toward everything that lives. Plus, again, my participation in the people's fight for peace and democracy. Carlos Bulosan lives. That concludes our reading portion for tonight. A special thank you to Portland-based photographer Justin Katigbak for sharing his photographs of the Carlos Bulosan archive. And another special thank you to Erna Cruz Louie with the American Center of Philippine Arts in Oakland for providing the music to our series. I will now hand it off to our executive director, Rossella De Leon, for the final announcements.
Thank you, Ron, and to all our amazing guest poetry readers for such a beautiful and touching program. I'm definitely inspired by the words of Carlos Bulosan all over again. Foundation for Philippine Progress has taught me that a full life is a life of purpose and a life of service to the people. And not just service to the people, but solidarity with them as well. For me, solidarity means being one with those we serve, living with them, facing their struggles alongside them, and struggling with them. Linking and raising our individual acts to the larger picture of advocating for a better future and for real change. And so today I invite you to be a part of that. There's room for you in the work of our foundation, regardless of your varying time and capacity. We invite you to follow us on social media. So we are on Instagram and Facebook at Philippine Progress. We also invite you to be our partner for progress. So if you visit tinyurl.com/partner for progress, we'll also paste that in the chat section. You will see that involvement really ranges from just being part of our mailing list to attending our events like this webinar, to volunteering, to donating, or hosting fundraiser towards our relief efforts. Second, we invite you to donate if you have the extra means, whether it's $1, $5, $20. We invite you to donate to continue to support our work and support the vulnerable communities that we are supporting in the Philippines. Whether it's the thousands of dollars or hundreds of dollars that some of our partners have donated towards typhoon, earthquake, volcanic eruption, and COVID-19 pandemic relief, or the bucket of coins that some of you have saved for our kababayans in the Philippines. Together, this makes all the difference in the lives of the communities in the Philippines. These simple acts do so much in changing the quality of life of our kababayans back home, and they're so thankful. You'll see in the slide here that when we've served them through medical and surgical missions, these communities really don't have a lot, and yet they come back the next day and they give us everything they've got to show us how thankful they are. So we hope that you join us. We hope that you join our growing list of partners for progress. And now to announce the raffle winners. Thank you all so much for sticking with us, for staying with us. I will call on Roger Rigor from our staff team to announce the winners of the raffle.
Thank you, Roselle. Hello, everyone. Indeed, today is a day filled with inspiration and tears, if I may say so, when the legacy and the words of Carlos Bulosan continues to steer us to action and move on. And so that's this Foundation for Philippine Progress. So in our effort to provide for our people in the Philippines, I would like to invite our viewers to continue with the upcoming series these coming weeks, while we raffle out books, as folks could find it in their hearts to donate at least $5, so you can continue the raffle, being part of the raffle. So here we go. I have the basket, and we have 2 books. The Philippines is in the Heart, and I will take one. I have a name here, all the names who have been here. This goes to Miss Amanda Hubbard. Amanda, just connect with us. And for a Tagalog picture dictionary in anticipation for the next presentation of Wikang Kayumangi, which is Brown language, the winner for this one is Marites Sorbano. Marites, congratulations. Thank you again for taking your time to support this series, and more importantly, extending your dollar contributions to the foundation for our people in the Philippines in great need. Marami pong salamat. We hope to see you again in our next presentation. Back to you, Rossella.
Thank you, Kuya Roger. I want to invite our team of staff who have been in the background to show their videos so that we could see them. This is our staff team that has been putting together this webinar series. These are people who have rolled up their sleeves and have done everything possible to make our programming happen. Thank you to Ronald Antonio, our marketing director. Thank you to Jillian Abenoha and I Kalalo, our project coordinators, and Roger Rigor, our PR coordinator. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to our board members, our staff team, and again, thank you to our guest readers for making this launch very special. Thank you again to Erna Cruz Louis of the American Center of Philippine Arts for donating the original Rondalia music, which you have heard playing in the background, and we will be playing it again as folks leave the room. We invite you to join us in the rest of the events in the series. We have 6 more events coming up. Coming up this Thursday, July 2nd, is Wikang Kayumangi, Learning and Appreciating Tagalog. This series will be every Thursday and Saturday for the next 3 weeks. So following the Tagalog lessons given by Roger Rigor, we will be featuring Food Network's Chopped winner, Chef Charlene, for our next event, which is Kumain Ka Na Ba?, a celebration of Filipino food, flavors, and family. So please visit tinyurl.com/iHeartPH to register to the rest of the events in the series. We have a lot of events really in store for you. Lastly, we would like to seek any feedback you have on this webinar and to hear if there are topics that you'd be interested in for our future events. We love to hear from you. Please give us your feedback by visiting tinyurl.com/iHeartPH feedback. I was looking through the chat from our participants, and it sounds like there has been lively participation from our participants, and there is even recommendations there already about next topics that we could focus on, like the legacy of Silme Domingo and Jean Viernes. So we invite all of you to please give us your feedback so that we could continue this series virtually. We hope to see you for the rest of our series. Maraming salamat sa inyong lahat. Goodbye.